All right. I'm going to do this myself. I have royally screwed up this tuner thing I had on here, so I'm just going to clone it down again. Tuner, Rails, deployment. Okay, and the image I'm going to put in is this picture of a seal making a face. So I'm going to put that on the site. Let me open up this bad boy. I was trying to think of like a good analogy for when I feel like this, but I can't really think of one. Say what? I don't know, man. Where I'm like, I feel like I could think of things like that. Anyway, okay, so there was a question about this in the last class, like what's the best way to put an image in here? I feel like Atom should have something where you can just drag and drop stuff into like over here, but I've never had any luck with it. Yeah, there's probably some package that lets you do that, but I haven't found it yet. So I'm just gonna do it the old-fashioned way. You could, be all hard-ass and everything and do like CP over into that thing, but I'm just gonna drag and drop. Actually, no, I'm gonna be slightly more hardcore, and I'm just gonna copy and paste, and there we go. Cool, awesome. Okay, to make this show up in my app, I need to close that. I'll just put this on my, say what? You're good? Cool. I'm going to put it here in my layout so that the seal shows up on every page. Because why not? Sounds like a good app to me. All right, it's called seal.jpg. So it would be tempting to do something like image source /assets /images /seal.jpg, which seems like it should work. But if I start that up, who wants to guess that it's not going to work? Because you would be right. If I go here, I should just get a broken image. There we go. Yep, I got this little broken image guy down there. So we can't actually do that. This is the way we would do it with HTML. We can't do it this way here. Instead, what you're going to do is you're going to use image tag and then just the name of the image. That's all. And then when I refresh this page, it should be on there now. And there it is. There's my seal. If you want to be correct, well, actually, if you take a look at this thing, you can see that it does, in fact, have an alt. But if you want to specify the alt you're going to use, you can just put in, like, use this alt argument here. Seals are cool. There we go. And that should have done it, I think. Now we should see, yep, seals are cool down there. Okay, so that's all very well, but check out this thing. What's this thing doing there? This is called a fingerprint. We're going to talk about that in a second. First, I want to push this up to Heroku. And while it's doing that, so what this fingerprint thing does is it actually reads all of the data inside this file, and then it uses some weird algorithm or something to turn it into one big long number. This number has letters in it. That's because this is in hexadecimal, where remember you have 16 digits to work with instead of just 10. So it converts it into some big long number. The reason it does that is because it's for something called cache busting. So that's cache, not like cache money, but like cache. So when your browser caches something, can anyone tell me what caching means? Browser caching? Anyone familiar with that? Probably had to like clear your cache before. Really do it when you like clear your cookies or something.
Like save it so.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when I go to some website, it's going to store a copy of any style sheets that were used on that web page, any JavaScript that was used on that web page. It's going to store a copy of that. That's one reason why it's really nice to use CDNs, because CDNs, most people will have already used your link. Come on, jQuery. So if I just do script source in a web page with this on it, lots of people use this URL. So whenever my browser sees that it should load a script from this URL, if it's already done it, then it's going to use the copy that it's already saved. If it hasn't done it yet, it's going to save a copy of this on your computer so that it doesn't have to load it again. That'll shave a couple seconds off the time your users use when they're trying to load your web page. That's the advantage of CDNs, is that so many websites use this exact same link that it speeds up things for you, whether or not you know it, across multiple websites. Anytime someone uses this URL, you're going to save a little bit of time. And that's fine, but if they change this jQuery file, then your browser is not going to know about it as long as they keep using the same URL. Your browser is just going to see, oh, jQuery 1.1.1.3, I've used that before, so I'm going to use the version that I have on my computer. Doing this cache busting thing, using this huge number down here, your browser is going to save this URL. It's going to cache this URL, but if I make any changes to the image, this fingerprint, this number is going to change. And so your browser is not going to recognize that it already has a saved version of that image. So it's just going to download it again. That makes sure that your users always use the most recent version of your images, your style sheets, your JavaScripts. Anytime you change those, it's also going to change this fingerprint. And so you're never going to have to worry about someone using old CSS. They're always going to use the most up-to-date version. So that's why it generates this big, long, ugly string right there. Let's see. Aha, there it is. Include 12-factor gem to enable all platform features. That's what I was talking about. So I wasn't just pulling that out of my butt. It's actually there. Okay, now let's see. Oh, I did just push this up to Heroku, so I'm going to open it up. Still Crag 8498. And I should be greeted by a seal. Oops, what did I forget? Anyone remember? Migrate, yeah, I forgot to migrate. Heroku run rake db migrate. Didn't even do that on purpose. I really didn't. Heroku run rake db seed. Today would be nice. There we go. Okay, cool. And now if I go back here, it's not there. I forgot to add it and commit it. Added seal. Git push Heroku master. Okay, you can already see that it's generating that fingerprint for this image. You can see that right there. It matches, there we go. All right, and there it is. So that matches the URL that we had down here. They're the exact same fingerprint. And again, they're the exact same fingerprint because it reads all the data in the file and it just turns all that data into some number. So as long as the file stays the same, it's always going to have the same fingerprint. It's always going to have the same number. If I change it a little bit, it'll have a different number. So there's that. But if I go up here, here's where things are a little bit different between environment and production. Between development and production. So up here you can see that I have 4 different JavaScript files up here in one CSS file. Whereas over here, I only have 1 JavaScript file. It didn't remove all of my JavaScript files. Instead, what it did was it smushed them all into one big JavaScript file. It took all of my different JS files and smushed them into one file. The reason for that is that just means fewer requests that users to your site have to make. Instead of loading 4 different JavaScript files, they're just going to load this one. And if you had multiple CSS files, it would just be one CSS file instead of a whole bunch. So that makes your app run a lot faster. It makes your users have a more seamless experience. And you can see that these things also have their own fingerprints up here. The downside of this, there are a lot of upsides to it, but the downside is that it doesn't always smush things together in the order that you want. So this is something that you're going to have to be a little careful with and make sure you test out when you deploy stuff to Heroku. It's another reason why you want to make sure you deploy early and test your stuff really often so that you can make sure these things are working the appropriate way. And yeah, this whole asset pipeline thing, it can just be like pretty unpredictable. I would say it's the most difficult part of deploying an app is managing your assets. So for instance, in the last WDI, there was a group of really bright students who wanted to use a custom font. And it took them like 2.5 days of just working on this one font. You remember that? That was Melissa's group? Yeah. And for some reason, it was like when Adrian stood behind them, it worked. But when he wasn't there, it didn't work. Eventually, they figured it out. I don't remember what the solution was. But fonts, that's an example of an asset, and that's a pretty tough thing to get to work the way you expect. Just because there's all this weird fingerprinting and everything going on. So when you run into a situation like that, if you ask us for help, we're probably just going to Google it. You can totally Google it yourself. If you don't have any luck, though, ask us, and well, we'll Google it as well, and then we'll figure it out together. So if you want a list of all the things that asset pipeline does, they're all right here. Concatenating, it's a big word for just smushing stuff together. Cool. Any questions about that? Mm-hmm. Images are really big for one thing. Databases are not intended for binary data. So when I say binary data, I mean like how if I go into my desktop and I try to look at this seal image, it looks like that and it gets all this weird stuff in it. That's because there's a whole bunch of zeros and ones in there that my computer is trying to represent as characters. The database isn't intended to store that kind of data. And it's also really big data. I mean, it may not look like it, but this thing is probably like 200 kilobytes, whereas the vast majority of stuff in your database is going to be like, 10 bytes, if that. It's going to be like 10 characters. So images really shouldn't go in a database. You could just host them somewhere else, like an imager or something, and that's perfectly fine. If your image is hosted somewhere else, then you don't need to do this image tag seal blah blah blah. In fact, you don't need to use image tag at all. You can do it the way you would get any image on Imager, which is just doing imager.com/blah-blah-blah.jpg. And that's fine. The same thing goes for CDNs. Like if you want to include Bootstrap on here, you could just do link rel style sheet href bootstrapcdn.com/bootstrap.css. I'm just making that up. But you could just do that. However, the problem is, well, that may not work. And that's because if you take a look at this site, you'll notice that it's HTTPS. Most CDNs are hosted on HTTP sites without the S. The S stands for secure. And the way you become HTTPS is you pay extra money to encrypt all of the data that goes in and out of your website. And that's expensive. And CDNs get a lot of traffic, so most of them don't do HTTPS. Heroku doesn't like you to use HTTP sites. It doesn't like you to link to things that are HTTP. That's because those things are considered insecure. And you don't want to introduce an insecure element onto your secure page. Heroku gives you security by default, and it doesn't want you to bring in insecure stuff. So that can lead to problems if you're trying to use like the Bootstrap CDN or something, and it's at an HTTP site. If you want to use Bootstrap or jQuery or whatever it is, or Normalize or whatever it is you want to use, a better bet is to use their gem. So you can see here that we have this jQuery Rails gem in here. For Bootstrap, I think it's just gem Bootstrap. And you would just install it that way, and then that'll take care of all of this stuff for you. So you don't need to worry about including CDNs and everything. It'll take care of all of that for you. So if you can use a gem, just use a gem. Any questions about that? Samir?
Other gems that help
I don't think so. Maybe. But I don't think so just because fonts come from so many different places, and fonts are also encoded in many different ways. I mean, there are TTF, OTF, WOFF fonts, lots of different kinds of fonts. There may be a gen that manages those, but I feel like the group in the last WDI probably would have like found one of those if it existed, and if they did, it didn't really seem to solve their problem. Yeah. Other questions? This is pretty much it, by the way. It isn't pretty much it. It is it. I don't really have anything else to talk about. Yeah.
Um, in style sheets,
Mm-hmm.
how would you do an SI pipeline?
So it already, man, I closed it. Why did I do that? It actually already shows you how to do it in here. Rebecca, I think it was you who was having the problem with it. I feel dumb about this. Do you go by Rebecca or Becca? Either way? Cool. Okay. So if you look in here in the layout.erb, it has a style sheet tag in here. So theoretically, you could just do this. And then if your style sheet is called, wombat.css, you would just type wombat. However, that doesn't seem to work. And I'm not entirely sure what it is you have to do to make that work. But I'll look into that because I've gotten that question like 3 times so far, so I should know that. Rebecca, did you figure it out? Oh, what was it? No, with the style sheet you were trying to get in there. Okay, well, I'll take a look at that and see if I can get that working. Right?
So I just didn't do anything. Just didn't do anything to this. Just creating the style sheet and automatically.
Yeah. So that's the other thing. So let me create a new style sheet in here. I'm just going to call it, I don't know, sup.css. I'm really bad at coming up with good names for these things. And I'm going to say background color red. Make sure it actually shows up. I go back here. It should all be red now. And there it is. Awesome. And you notice that all I did was create the style sheet. I didn't actually link that anywhere. The reason for that is if you look in this application.css, you see this require tree thing here? So this looks like a comment, but it's not. It's a Rails-specific command where what it does is it pulls in every single style sheet that's inside this style sheets directory. And so by default, it's going to load all of these. If I get rid of it, then it should no longer work. And it doesn't. It only does this one because it says require self.
Is that the same with the JavaScript file?
Yes. Yep.
JavaScript, you don't need to just create the file.
Right, exactly. Yeah, like you can see in here, I've got the same require tree thing in there. So the only situation in which you would need to worry about it, I would say, is if you want one style sheet to show up on one page, but not another page. Then things get a little more complicated. So I would say for now, just don't do that if you can avoid it. Samir?
But that doesn't, what order does it add in?
Yeah. So remember how I mentioned that sometimes it doesn't smush the files in together in the way you want? That's a result of using this require tree. I don't actually remember the order in which it does it, but if there is a particular order in which it has to be done, then I would say don't use require tree. Instead, just go through and explicitly require the files you need. So instead of doing require tree, I would start off with require self, and then require, let's see, sup. And then I would explicitly say in what order they should be loaded in. Other questions? All right. So for the remainder of the class, what I'd like you guys to do is try to get your Scribble up on Heroku. And this is really good preparation for next week, for the project week, when you're going to have to deploy your own new project up at Heroku. So take this opportunity and try to work out those deployment bugs. I'm going to ask that you stay in the room and not go work elsewhere, just because people tend to have the exact same issue, and that way you can sort of share it around with everyone all at once. But I'm going to be floating around. Erica's going to be floating around. Feel free to collar us, and we'll come help out. Cool. Yeah. you
just on my web back it's back to like the .git thing where it's like on a folder. So when I was, how would you do it? I had to, I was like, working from right originally the home originally. Where I worked the program down and then I created the Rails app and some of the folders and then it's above it. So I understand that I can run that code back up there. How would I do it in the first place? Like I worked the phone that creates a script folder. Not just create a Rails app outside of that folder, call it script folder.
Yeah, you can actually. So to create a Rails app inside the folder you're currently in, I think. Yeah, I'm probably going to get this wrong. I think. Well, here, let me make dir test Rails. I think you just do Rails new at name dot. I could be wrong. That looks promising. I forgot to click QuickTime. Oh, well. Today. Ah, nope, that wasn't it. Damn. Yeah, let me look that up.
Okay, because I'm just curious because I assume like you want to pull components that we can create a pull request now.
Mm-hmm.
Like we're creating the app inside and let's not off that documentation at the time.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you can see I've Googled this before. Let's see. Rails new, Rails new dot. Oh, that's what it is. So you just make sure the folder is named, whatever you want your app to be named. So in this case, if my app is going to be named Test Rails. If I didn't want it to be named Test Rails, I would just rename this folder to something else like Robin's Dank app. Go back into that. And now you just do Rails new dot. That's it. So before I did Rails new my app dot, you actually just want Rails new dot. And then do PostgreSQL. Yeah, exactly.